Good morning and welcome. I am Jupiter Slut, Shameless, Luminous, Untamed Truth. And this morning we are talking boundaries for women with Jenelle Marie Pierce, who is Executive Director of the STD Project and Spokesperson for Positive Singles. I have herpes and I am so excited to welcome this woman who is doing so much incredible work in the world to dispel shame and to help people live with the condition of being human.
Thank you so much for having me and for being interested in having this conversation and sharing publicly, because not everybody can and it feels safe enough to do so. So it isn't necessarily for everybody, but I feel like when you get to that point, it's so empowering and it's so exciting to hear you say like, I have herpes, and you say it in such a kind of nonchalant, just matter of fact way. And that's really truly how it feels once you get over that initial stigma and shame. And had herpes since I was 16 years old. I'm 36 now. So this is like my 20-year anniversary. I'm going to do some celebrations this year coming up, leading up to that. And it was so tough for me. And it took me a long time to move past that shame and to overcome and to realize that the misconceptions and the things that are said about people who have STIs and herpes in particular really gets a lot of the jokes and is really like kind of the butt of all of the STI shame and jokes and things like that and stigma. But anyways, it took me years to overcome that and to realize that all of those misconceptions aren't actually relevant to who I am, and they don't pertain to me, and they aren't representative of my experience and my situation. And so I wanted to do something in order to help people to get past that a lot faster than I was able to. So I launched the STD Project. You know, we're kind of at the very forefront of this idea of people sharing about having herpes and having an STI and talking about it honestly and publicly and whatever. And very few people still are doing that, even and empower individuals to make the best decisions for their bodies and for their relationships as it applies and as it works for them. So yes, that's what I'm doing right now.
I ask, STI, STD, because you are somebody who professionally speaks about this, how do you know which one to use? I've been told by a few people that the STD is dead, that you should only use STI or different things. So can you clarify for us?
Every once in a while I get that, especially from like sexual health educators who are in the know, who have the privilege of being up to date on current terminology and what the nuance is between the two terms. So the difference between STI and STD, STI is sexually transmitted infection, STD is sexually transmitted disease. All sexually transmitted diseases are preceded by an STI. So it starts with an infection. So we use them interchangeably, but at this point when I talk to educators or even just anybody in general who's asking the question, I say that typically you can just use it interchangeably. Like you're not necessarily incorrect when you say, oh, STI or STD. You'd have to know, is that person getting signs or symptoms? What are they experiencing? So on and so forth. And it's okay. Right now, it's fine to say either one.
So you've got a couple of hats. And when you think of boundaries for women, when you're wearing your STD Project hat, what are the most pressing skills you think women need based on the work you do dispelling shame and stigma?
That is such a good question. I think there are a few, and I think one of the skills, and I don't know if I would call this a skill or maybe an awareness, and maybe that is a skill in and of itself of like opening yourself up and making sure to be aware, but empowering yourself to find the resources that suit you. So not accepting a narrative that makes you feel awful about yourself. As women, there is so much in our culture that tells us how we're supposed to be, especially when we're talking about human sexuality, who we're supposed to have sex with, when and how much and where and what kind and all of these things. And it's like none of that actually really helps us or furthers us along, and it stops us, I think, from doing what is actually best for ourselves, for our individual needs and wants, and being able to ask for what we want and say no when there is something that we don't want. So to come full circle, I think in order to feel to feel empowered, you have to be able to say, no, like that doesn't fit. This doesn't fit who I am. It doesn't fit what I want for my life. And that's not easy to do. And I think it helps if you find other people who are mimicking or doing similar things and doing that kind of taking that empowered stance. So I mean, like finding advocates and resources on the internet and people on social media who are living a life that you're like, yes, they seem like uplifting or empowered. It doesn't even have to be you're always positive, but it just feels like they know where they're headed, and like follow those folks' lead so that you can also do the same thing. So I guess being aware and finding resources, support, and people that make sense for your life instead of just following the norm. I mean, that's kind of this really Heidi idea in terms of skill set or whatever, but I think that that's important. Like it's just, man, I've just been fighting that lately too. And like of what women are supposed to do and what we're supposed to say and how we're supposed to not take up so much space and how we're not supposed to be bold. And like, I get that a lot. I mean, well, less often than you would think. Like when I first launched the STD project, started talking about like, I have herpes. I've also had HPV and scabies, by the way. And like, so technically I've had 3 STIs that I'm aware of. Like who admits this stuff, right? And people are like, why does she need to talk about it? Like, okay, that's fine that she doesn't feel shame, but why does she need to talk about it out loud? Like it makes people feel uncomfortable because we're taught to feel this shame and this, and it's a societal form of control, I think. And sometimes like some of these societal like things that we do as a society, adhered or common behavior, sometimes that's for our protection or just to so we can all function together. But some of them really don't make a difference. Like what I do in the bedroom and what I talk about out loud on social media does not hurt or harm, or I mean, hopefully it helps other people. But if you don't like it, then like click no or hide me or unfollow or delete. You know what I mean? It's so simple, but it's like a big idea that's super simple, but actually in practice, it's so hard to not get in our heads about it. So that's what I would say. It's like find people who motivate you and inspire you so that you can get out of your head and actually do what is best for you.
Thank you so much. We're going to come back with another question in just a moment. So glad you're here today, Jenelle.
Thank you.
We have just had the most amazing morning of insights so far with her talking about awareness being one of the skills that we need to have good boundaries, and women should be looking for resources that really suit them and their lifestyle when seeking help around STDs and creating boundaries, and really jettisoning the supposed tos that have been holding women back for so long. So the question we're gonna give Jenelle now is, all right, are you ready?
I'm ready.
You are the spokesperson for Positive Singles. Do you think women who have an STD have any different needs around boundaries? Meaning women who have STDs versus women who don't test positive for anything. What kind of different boundaries, needs, or experiences might they have?
For sure. I think that people might assume that the answer would be yes, especially because of my work as a spokesperson for Positive Singles. However, my actual answer is absolutely no, definitely not. And this also applies to, like, I love how you said jettisoning things that don't apply, or, you know, getting rid of what you are told you need to do or you should be doing. And we at the STD Project especially, but in the work that I do across, like, I'm also a tri-chair of the National Coalition for Sexual Health on their Communications Action Committee and things like that. So a couple of the other roles that I participate in, I always talk about how we need to, as educators, as public health advocates, as whomever we are, we need to get the word should out of our vocabulary. And we do this especially around, like, STI, sexual health, safer sex. We're always saying you should use a condom with every partner consistently and correctly, always. And you should get tested before and after each new partner and every 3 months. And these are all the things you should get tested for. And truly, each relationship, each partnership And there's different dynamics. And as long as you're aware of your risks and things, it's all up to you and how that actually applies and how that's going to work and what suits you and your partner or partners. So I hate the idea of this should, because that doesn't actually fit everybody. If we're all so unique, we can customize everything, right? We can customize our phone case and our car steering wheel, or that's like such a 90s thing. But anyways, we can show our individuality in so many different ways, but then we're telling everybody that they need to follow this specific sexual health, safer sex path. And same applies for your question. So to come full circle, you're asking about whether or not someone with an STI needs to do different things or has different boundaries. And I think that's totally up to them. Absolutes don't really work when we're talking about human interaction and human connection and relationships. Those always, never, should. That's not up to me, to make that decision for someone in their body. And so if that applies and you do want to change things, great. If not, that's awesome too. It's like, as long as we know our risks and the rewards and we can kind of weigh those and decide what is best, then that's all I really care about, is empowering people to make decisions that are best for them, especially when as it pertains to their sexual health.
I really liked how you talked about the progression of skills that you might develop as a result of having gotten an infection, but that there's not necessarily like, if you're positive, you have to have different boundaries, or you should this or should that. I wish me of 20 years ago had you as a resource. But
I wish me of 20 years ago had me as a resource too.
Right? And I think that's so often what inspires us. We see that like something we needed didn't exist. Mm-hmm. And it was probably 1996 that I got herpes, and I was living in New Orleans. And back then there was no internet, right? I had to go to the library or the bookstore, which quite frankly, I don't think I knew where we're in New Orleans. I had to wait till I went home to Washington State to get a book, right? I think it's easy, even for those of us who've lived through all this technological change, to forget how isolating and also how much work, labor hours it was to get information. Mm-hmm. So this is, we were talking a little bit before about how maybe our change around shame isn't gone as fast as we might like, but on the other hand, the speed at which we can be accelerating this conversation is makes this a really exciting time. What do you want to say for women who may not even know what needs they have around boundaries, because nobody's ever talked to them about it, right? If we're talking about how people haven't talked to us about, didn't talk to us about our diagnoses with herpes, there was absolute silence around how to have boundaries as a woman in my life back in the 90s. And it's a little hard for me to articulate still, but those are really connected. That shame around saying, there's a lot of shame around boundaries as well as a lot of shame around sexuality, and they're not. Anyways, I'm going to leave the question for you now.
No, I hear you, and I do. I think it's like it's multifaceted and multi-layered. Like it crosses over into a couple of areas. So like, I would say right from the start, well, I had two answers come to mind right away. First of all, in terms of as someone who has a vulva and a vagina, I guess. So if you're women identifying, but you have a penis, what I'm just about to say right now it doesn't relate or doesn't apply specifically. But if you have a vulva and a vagina, whether you're woman or male identifying or non-binary, you are more susceptible to contracting an STI. And that's just because your STIs are more easily contracted in areas where we have mucous membranes. Mucous membranes are porous, permeable tissue that's meant to trap unwanted pathogens. And those mucous membranes are located on the vulva, the vagina, and the urethra, the anus, as well as our eyes, our nose, our ears, our mouths. So any of those locations that get exposed in terms of intimate partner relationships or interaction, I guess, sexual activity, whatever. That's where you're going to be more susceptible to contracting infection. So people with, I should say people with a vulva or a vagina have more mucous membranes that are exposed in the genital area when we're talking about like genital intimate interaction. So there's already a little bit of an increased risk, and quite a bit actually, of an increased risk for contracting. And then once you already have an STI, the other thing though, this may be necessarily a need. Again, I hate to like tell somebody what their needs are, but this is just something to be aware of, I guess, to know and to decide how this fits for you. But if you already have one STI, you are more at risk of contracting an additional infection. So that's something to know and to be cognizant of. And then you decide, like, does that mean I would like to incorporate more safer sex practices? Does that mean I would like to have additional communication about testing? Does that mean I want to change the timing of when I start engaging in intimate, like skin on skin and sexual activities? I mean, how does that actually work for you, I guess, are the questions that you want to ask. What risks are you willing to accept, and what risks do you want to mitigate, and how do you want to reduce those risks? How do you want to mitigate those risks? All of those things are relevant questions for everyone, really. So back to like the boundaries with women, and if you take the STI positive or negative out there, I think the other part that is really applicable, and that this has been talked about a lot, but I guess that it can't be talked about enough, is being able to say when something does not work or is not going to be okay for you, to be able to say no, and to be encourage that it's okay to say no. Like, you can stop right in the middle of something happening, and you can take away your consent and say, this is no longer serving me, or this isn't going to work. And not only that too, I think women need to be seen and heard. And we're told so much, and part of our culture and our historical like junk is that we're not supposed to be seen and heard. We're supposed to be quiet and demure and take up little space. And none of that makes any sense. We're all humans, and why can't we all be seen and heard in different ways? And you can be a small statured person, you can be a large statured person, you can be quiet, you can be loud. I mean, I don't know why we put these labels on these things are bad, but to know, I think for women, when women identifying people are looking for partnerships and looking for good relationships, being encouraged that it's okay if that relationship isn't a fit, and to be able to walk away, and that somebody out there will support you in doing that and making that decision. Like, you are not identified by your relationship. That's something that's like been consistent, this idea throughout my life, that somehow you're more worthy if you have a partner, if you have a long-term relationship, a monogamous relationship too. That doesn't make any sense and doesn't apply for everybody. Monogamy isn't always the right fit. If you're married, not everybody needs to get married, and majority of marriages, are not quite the majority, but just under the majority of marriages end up in divorce anyhow. I mean, I'm divorced twice already, so I'm married again. But I mean, it's like, it's okay if whatever narrative, whatever linear or idea that has been told to you of what you're supposed to do with your life, it's okay if you're like, that just isn't going to work for me. But I mean, we just need to encourage one another and hear and see one another, and allow for people to make a different path and different choice, or whatever choice that is. It doesn't even have to be labeled as different, a choice that is best for them. So
we are back with a final question for Jenelle. And here we're going to weave all the threads together. So we're in the middle of a year-long discussion on boundaries for women with all kinds of experts. And we're organizing that a bit by month and by week. So first week of the month, your wants are sacred. And this is a personal manifesto for me that I'm sharing with the world, and you can adopt it or hate it or whatever you want. But my truth this year is, your wants are a guidepost to what makes you most alive. Mistrusting yourself and your wants makes you vulnerable to manipulation. And so that is why my wants are sacred, and you're welcome to believe that about your wants as well. But I don't want to use a condom for a blowjob. And when I've tried to talk to men about the boundaries I do want, I've often got a lot of like, why are you bothering me with this? A lot of, I wish you would shut up about this conversation. I wish you'd just give me the sex I want and not put restrictions on it. They've acted like I'm being unreasonable and such. So thank you for talking about the increased risk. Biologically, in my own life, I've been dismissed when I've brought my own safety to the board and taken responsibility for myself by starting that conversation, I've been dismissed by people who have a lower risk in that situation. A higher reward and a lower risk, right? Percentage likelihood of who's going to have an orgasm, percentage likelihood of who's going to get an STD, right? And those are the kind of cold hard facts that no one ever encouraged me to look for. And in fact, when I got my STD, the biggest shockaroo for me was the next guy I dated. I was having a herpes outbreak. I didn't know how to have a herpes conversation. So instead I just told him no. I told him not ready. It was like only the first or second date and he was trying to get his hands down my pants. And I didn't even know if like, I just was so, I just knew I needed to say no for his protection. And he wouldn't listen to my no. And I never would have spoken up about that in the past, because in the past I would have thought it was flattering. He was pursuing me. That was a compliment. I wouldn't want to hurt his feelings. So I wouldn't have even had boundaries. So I love my herpes because it was one of the first lessons to how essential it is to have boundaries. And then all of a sudden it flipped how I saw it. And I looked and I was like, I am trying to protect you while you're violating me. I said no to protect you and you're not listening to me. Now, and then I told him, like the next, like a week later, like, you know what? I said, no, there was a good reason for that, and you weren't respecting me. And I was like so quiet and sweet about it. But I was like, you know, and I told him I had herpes, ghost white, terror stricken, and I never had to deal with that asshole again. He never called back, right? So it's also been the best filter to keep assholes out of my life. And so in that, I think with that little story, hopefully, I just illustrated how complicated, like 20 years later, I still don't want to use a condom. I got herpes using a condom. So there's like this, okay, in the nitty gritty world, on the ground, in your own life, how do you know which boundaries to have, right? You're like, okay, I want to be empowered. How do you steer through all of the, like, there's the scientific angle of like what boundaries, what for your physical safety, but then there's also the boundaries, the emotional aspects. And like when you're like in the midst of your life, how do you identify and know which are the right boundaries for you? Especially when we're saying like, you don't have to listen to the shoulds, you get to have what's right for you. Well, how do you identify what's right for you?
That's really hard too, I think, especially for women identifying folks. Like our culture does not amplify outside of the like treat yourself kind of deal hashtag. Like it does not say like to put you first. Like women are always the caregivers, the caretakers. And so their needs are always kind of put last when it's like taking care of family, loved ones, friends, like everybody. And, man, I mean, that's such a good story, because I think it's also important to recognize that we don't always know, and it's okay to not know what your boundaries are. It's okay to be like, I actually have no idea what I want, or how even to, not only do I not know what I want, of course, then the next step is I don't even know how to ask for what I want or advocate for that. And so this conversation is great because that's the first start. Like you, oh my gosh, like Jupiter, that blows my mind because your story is very common. Like not that, I mean, I hear that so often from other folks too, and I've been in that same situation. You even were still trying to justify why you had said no after he had violated, and after you had said no, and you still came back with, well, I needed to tell you this, and like exactly, like bye Felicia, obviously that was not a good fit. And it's a shame because sometimes you may really be interested in someone, and if you say no, or if you put out a boundary and they push back against that or have an adverse reaction, then you're worried like, well, maybe I shouldn't have had this boundary. And that's their reaction is not a result of like who you are and your situation. It's a result of their lack of information, their lack of education. And, you know, it really is like this happens a lot of times too. When people are positive for an STI, they're like, well, what if I get rejected? I mean, but the thing is there's reasons and good reasons to reject people, vice versa. And we get rejected all the time without even getting to know why. So like, of course, somebody who's recently diagnosed never wants to hear this, but I hear so many times from folks who've had an STI, especially one like herpes that's so stigmatized and like the butt of all pop culture jokes. I hear that a lot of times they're like, wow, it helped me to learn like who was junk and who I didn't want in my life, and which partners really weren't going to help me or care for me and didn't care about my sexual health at all. And that's the thing. Like, I've even heard this from a sexual health educator friend of mine. When she has a new partner, she always talks about she wants to use condoms, and she also incorporates lube, and then she asks them about testing. And she says, I can't tell you how many times somebody has come back to me and said, why are you asking that? And is that because you sleep around? Like, do you have a lot of partners? And immediately there are assumptions made, like the person who's being proactive and thinking about safer sex and talking about it and wanting to communicate immediately gets pigeonholed or gets put into this, you must be a slut, you must be trashy, promiscuous, or whatever kind of bag. And so it's so ridiculous, because it's the opposite of what the reaction should be. It's the people who don't ask those questions, who aren't talking a little bit, at least a little bit, about safer sex and things and what their expectations are. Those are the people that should be the red and orange flags. You made a good point with that, with the condoms. Like, I still don't really want to use condoms for oral sex. And truth be told, with most of my partners, we've never used condoms, and I've had herpes for 20 years. And it's been a choice that we've made together. Once they're fully aware of the risk, we've talked about it, they're aware, I'm aware of how I may feel after transmitting it to them too. If they end up contracting herpes from me, am I okay with that? Am I okay with transmitting it to someone else? Or is that going to really break me? Is that going to limit me or change the dynamic of the relationship in a way that I can't handle? Because as a person who has an STI, I also get to say, I either want to or don't want to use condoms. And the other person or persons then get to also come back with that will either work or won't work for me. And condoms are just one way in which to practice safer sex. And the thing is yes, you can contract, just like you said, like you can contract an STI even using condoms. So I think like the important thing is to be as aware as possible with what the risks are and where you're at and what things are like, yeah, I think I really want to make sure to incorporate this. And then if somebody isn't receptive to that, then that might be, you're like, well, we need to stop for right now and then circle back or whatever. And then even if that boundary gets crossed and then you end up pursuing something that you don't feel good about later, or that you change your mind about, that's okay too, because our boundaries change. They grow with us. They grow as new information comes to the forefront and we have more knowledge, more insight, and more experience. You know, maybe we think we're into anal sex and then we try it and we're like, oh, yep, that wasn't for me, or it wasn't for me with that partner, or it wasn't for me because we weren't using lube for that specific scenario, situation, or how I was feeling that day. I mean, there can be all of these different, I guess what I'm trying to say, again, all these long answers, I'm so sorry, but long-winded answers. But what I'm trying to say is your boundaries can change, and it's okay to not know exactly what that is right now. But as you try and as you have access to a little bit more resources and things like that, that will improve and you'll feel stronger about it. And this comes actually true full circle for one of the original questions that you were asking about the tools that we can use as women, and skills and resources. It's finding the folks who are modeling behavior in ways and in kind of their lifestyle choices or patterns or things like that, that you're like, I really admire that. I really aspire to be in that position. Finding those people, because they'll support you in also seeking out what your boundaries are and how to advocate for them. So it's a work in process and you don't have to have all the answers.
What a beautiful wrap up. Thank you. And I couldn't agree more. You don't have to have all the answers. In fact, you can't. It's impossible to have all the answers. You're only supposed to know what you know today, and the resources for what you need to find out next are waiting to be discovered. And I got some really great direction, Jenelle, to look for those people who inspire you to be who you want to be, right? And that certainly is true when it comes to any area of shame, boundaries, safety, sexual health, or just being a woman. That we are going to wrap up. I don't want to. I wanted to keep Jenelle here forever, because what a rich topic and what fabulous work you are doing in the world. So we will have to connect with you another way, another time. So for now, people listening to this conversation who may want to get in touch with your work, where do they find you?
So, of course, the stdproject.com, and I'm on social media across the board. However, I think same idea applies, finding people who resonate with you and who their energy like really fits and who you're inspired by or uplifted by, and or who you feel seen and heard by too, and who's allowing and creating space for you and to heal, to grow, to just be whoever you want to be wherever you're at. And we do like the Herpes Activist Network is on herpes.education/hands. So it's hands. That's hands is called the Herpes Activist Network, networking to dismantle stigma, but it's at herpes.education/hands. And the idea, the reason I'm kind of pointing you in that direction is because there are like 20 plus different advocates, and we all have different energy. Like if you didn't necessarily love the way in which I described something, my long-winded answers, my energy, my look, my whatever it is, I mean, it doesn't matter. There are tons of other people doing this similar work, but doing it in different ways and also creating different spaces and sharing different stories and whatever. So I think that's an awesome way to say, like, I know I want additional resources along this line, but maybe this person isn't the best fit, or the messaging isn't the best, but there are other people. So find those resources and come and seek us out, and check out the work that everybody else is doing too, because it's so important. And I think you'll really find somebody who you resonate with and love.
Oh, that's fabulous. I am going to invite everybody who wants to find me to come check out my new website, undiminished.me. And that is so exciting to have that. That's the first time I get to say that, because all of my work is around shame, whether it's my work on sexuality or my work as a math educator, what I used to do, or my public speaking, any topic that I'm looking at how do we make things emotionally safe for people? How do we dispel shame? And so whether we're talking about contracting herpes, or whether we're talking about shame around money or boundaries or having had a history of abuse, whatever it is you have shame around, in truth, it hasn't diminished you at all. So undiminished.me, if you want to you want to find out about classes with me on body wisdom, classes at undiminished.me. And we're both going to have our links in the description box. So you can find us there as well. Have a wonderful week until next week. And again, Jenelle, thank you for being here.
Pleasure's all mine. Loved it. Really enjoyed it. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing.
How do we heal the wounds of the past as we forge a new world in which women's worth is never diminished? How do we change the world? It starts with me. It starts today. It starts with one new thought. What does it mean to be valued deeply? The Women's Worth Workshop is about learning to trust yourself as you glory in the value of your worth. Let it spread like wildfire.
You are not alone. Join the conversation. Be a part of the solution at undiminished.me.